Good evening. Welcome to the November 20th meeting of the City Council of Half Moon Bay. May I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Reddick.
Here.
Vice Mayor Rohrbeck.
Here.
Mayor Penrose.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Can we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Do we have proclamations and presentations? Okay. I have a couple of announcements about events that are coming up. It's maybe a little early, but I thought because of the holiday season and the rush and people maybe not being at our next council meeting, I'd mention them. Coastside Hope has its annual Adopt a Family. Please give to that. It's a wonderful, wonderful program, and it helps the poor people who live here on the coast. On Friday, December the 7th, we have our Night of Lights. It starts at 6 o'clock. That's a fun event. Everybody should attend that. On Saturday, December the 8th, we'll be having our first quarterly community town hall meeting at the Main Street Park Committee meeting. Now, I'm not 100% sure that it's going to be Saturday. Did we decide that was December the 8th? Yes. Okay, thank you. Also, December the 8th at 6 p.m., Pillar Point Harbor has its celebration of the Christmas tree lights on the boats there, and that's another wonderful event. People should attend. It's beautiful. On December the 12th, I believe it's the State of the City address. Now, I had gotten an email that said December the 10th, but that's a Monday night, and we have SAM meeting that night. Can you speak to that, Matthew?
So we will do December the 12th. We will have to do it at the EOC. The library is not available that night. So 6 p.m. December 12th at the EOC.
Great. Thank you. That's just a summary of what's gone on for this past year, the state of the city, where we are, what we've accomplished, what we have yet to do.
Yes.
Thank you. On December the 1st, the Fire District is having an open house for its new training facility for the community. This is a great opportunity for all the Coastside volunteer groups to connect with the community in the Fire District. Current invites include the County OES, Operations Emergency Services, the Red Cross CERT, and our Half Moon Bay volunteer firefighters. And last but certainly not least, on December the 21st, we will have our annual La Posada procession, which is just a wonderful, wonderful procession. And if anybody wants to know more about that, please get in touch with me and I'd be happy to tell you about it. It's a wonderful event. There is nothing to report out from our recent closed session. So we are going to stop this meeting right now and recess for a reception to welcome our new city manager, Bob Nisbet.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. I was here, I think, 2 months ago. Some of you may have been here, and that was when my contract was approved for this position. I was really happy then, and I think I made the comment that I was looking forward to hitting the ground running. I am now here, and I have hit the ground running. I am now in my 4th week, and so far so good. I'm very excited to be the new city manager in Half Moon Bay. The community has been great. The council has been great. I've been spending time getting to know the council. I've met members of the community. I've actually frequented businesses in town. I do not live here yet, but it is our plan, my wife and I's plan, to move to Half Moon Bay. And we are taking steps to make that happen sometime next year. Until then, I'm commuting and I am spending time in the evenings in hotels, and in my first 4 weeks, it really just has been an incredible experience. I've had the opportunity to go to a sit-down dinner, a conversation over dinner with various community members and talk about housing. I've had the opportunity to go to a lunch and meet with my city manager counterparts in other cities in San Mateo County. It really just has been an amazing whirlwind, I'll say, but just an incredible experience. And I'm just so happy to be here and looking forward to hitting the ground running next week. So with that, that's the comments I have. I'm happy to be in this chair and happy to be participating in my first meeting. It is possible I have some family members watching this online in Tucson, Arizona. So if they are watching, hello from your son.
Okay, we'll take a 15-minute break. Could everyone please have a seat? We're restarting our city council meeting. Thank you. We will have city manager updates to council.
Sure. Madam Mayor, members of the council, I'll go ahead and start this item since it's city manager updates. We do have 3 updates, 2 that are shown on your agenda. Upcoming sessions on the local coastal land use plan, and also an update on the November 6th general election. But before we get to that, there's just something I wanted to talk about briefly that's not on the agenda, and that is just some comments on the smoke, the fires, the weather that we've had recently. I just think are worth some comments, and so I'd like to make those at this time if I could. Just starting with the air, I think we all probably noticed today that the air was actually better today, so that was nice to see, and we're all pleased with that, and the forecast does look like it is better tomorrow. I went online before I came here today. It was we were shown in the moderate category. I'm sure everyone has found that website. And then, of course, there's also rain in the forecast, so very thankful for that. If you haven't found that website, and if things do take a turn for the worst, I think the best site to check is airnow.gov. Most people have probably found that site by now. Very easy to use. Type in the zip code, and you can quickly find the air quality index for Half Moon Bay. And they have categories. They explain the categories, and it's very clear when they're saying that it's unhealthy conditions, which is when the air quality index is in the 100 to 200 range. So I just wanted to mention that things are looking up. As people may know, we did make a decision last week to close City Hall. I think Friday and then maybe Saturday is when the air probably hit its worst point in Half Moon Bay and the rest of the Bay Area. This was obviously a judgment call that we had to make. Probably there's not a lot of precedent for closing City Hall or the community or this community center, but it is a decision we made. We thought it was the right thing to do for our employees, and we felt, given it was a Friday, that it was best to have them not come in. We did make arrangements that some employees were still going to come in if they wanted to, and so we kind of called it a soft closing. We do apologize for the inconvenience that might have caused people, but we were conscious that in making that decision, it's about our employees, but it's also about the community. We do have a role as responders and being here for emergency preparedness, being here for the city, and we were very conscious of that. And we do want to do what we can if people have questions. We do have N95 masks, for example. Many of you have probably noticed that you get differing responses on the effectiveness of those masks. So I will say that the city has them. We are passing them out to anyone who comes by and wants one, but we will put out the caveat now, and we'll continue to do that, that they are not necessarily that effective. They have to be installed properly. They have to be changed periodically, and they don't necessarily work for very small particulate matter. So you just have to know that. I think a lot of people felt they could put the N95 on and they were safe to go out, and that is not the message that we're hearing or that you can read anywhere on the website. But those are available at City Hall, and we don't plan on making any more closures. Obviously, we have public spaces. There's the library, there's this building, there's City Hall that should be available if people need a place to go, are scared, have questions, and so we want to be there for that. Let me see. The best advice, obviously, is to stay indoors. That's what you hear on the news. That's what you're hearing from all the agencies who are experts on this. The best thing to do when the air quality index goes to that level is to stay in your house if you can. If you don't have that option, again, there are the masks, and it's best to try to not be in those unhealthy conditions. Finally, the last comment I want to make is on the fires. The smoke is very unhealthy and an inconvenience, and we all know that. But I think also maybe then if we forget that there are a lot of people that are a lot less fortunate than us. We're dealing with unhealthy air, but this has just really been a traumatic event. Some of the statistics I read recently, although it's maybe 60% contained now, the Camp Fire burned over 150,000 acres, claimed over 77 lives. That's as of Monday, but there are still people unaccounted for, and 12,000 either homes or structures have been burnt during this fire. So I think it's always important as we dealt with the unhealthy air to remember that and keep that in mind. So if this is something that has touched your heart, there is ways to give. Hopefully people have found those ways. It seems to me the best website that I have found is nvcf.org. That's the North Valley Community Foundation. They're located in Chico. What I read today is they've already raised over $4 million, and they're making it very clear that money is really what they need. They have received a lot of clothing, a lot of items, but it's really money at this point. And $4 million, although a lot of money, is really a drop in the bucket. So that's the site where you can go. Also heard today that the Half Moon Bay Brewery is also aware of that site, and they have committed on Thanksgiving, all sales of food and beverages, all the proceeds for sales of food and beverages on Thanksgiving, if you choose to go there, they will also commit to the North Valley Community Foundation site. So that's good to know if you want to do it locally on Thanksgiving. And then finally, this has got us all thinking as staff about emergency preparedness here in Half Moon Bay. And it's something that is our responsibility and we think about a lot, but after an event like this, it really makes us kind of go back to our plans and think about what we would do if this happened here. And so one of my commitments and with my staff in the first 6 months of 2019 is put some energy into this, look at our plans, work with our partners, the fire district, OES from the county, and do some training, maybe do a community event, but really think about how we would respond if this were to happen here. And I think that's really important to learn from these things. So that's all I have on that, unless there's any questions or any comments the council would like to make on that.
I reached out to the county to just see what they were doing at the end of last week. So I thought I would just read a little bit of the messages that I received from Don Horsley's office. And his staff, Jazelyn Lamadora, said that the San Mateo County Health Department has been contacting all their vulnerable clients by phone to assess their risk and their medical needs and people with specific protocols. So they've actually done a fair amount of outreach, which they will continue to do over the next several days at the holiday weekend. They've not been passing out masks, I think for the same reason that Sacramento County has not been doing it, just because it's hard to educate people around the masks at the same time. I think they have them available, but they're not doing mass distributions. And then on the morning of Friday the 9th, which I think was the first day of the fire, they did a lot of outreach with the homeless and safety net partners to share information about the air quality issues and to activate the inclement weather program. So I'm not sure that that's still activated, but that might be an opportunity for some of our unsheltered folks to take advantage of that. Not just because of the cold weather, but because of any lingering bad air quality, that might be good. So that's pretty much it. And as a resident, you can contact the county as well, since they are the health agency and have a lot of services for vulnerable populations. But feel free to contact the city, or the county if you have any questions. And that information should be available on the city's website.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. We're going to reverse the order of the two items on the agenda. The next item will be Jill Akis on an update on the process for the rollout of the local coastal plan amendment.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, Council. Staff is absolutely thrilled to be out and about with our first 6 chapters of the draft local coastal land use plan. These went out to the Planning Commission on October 30th. We had a special session that night, and you can see here, this is the cover. The document is available for folks to read online at www.planhmb.org. And we are gearing up for a series of study sessions, taking the various chapters in what we hope will be bite-sized pieces. And I'd like to go ahead and show you a few of those dates. And if somebody could click one slide forward. Thank you. So the very first study session will be Tuesday, November 27th, and we're going to focus on probably the most complex chapter, which is natural resources. At our kickoff meeting on October 30th, we had a presentation of all of the new maps that have come through this process. Council really made a commitment to having those done through the Huffman Broadway Group, which is partially grant funded through the California Coastal Commission as an LCP update grant. They are quite spectacular, detailed, and incredibly well researched. They take into account 60 studies or more that we have had in our archives. So that's a big first step. Now we're looking for another special meeting. We really want to get this moving while we have all this great momentum. So on December 19th, which would be a Wednesday, we are planning a special Planning Commission session to cover 4 chapters. And the reason why we think we can get through this is these are chapters that they saw just over a year ago that were pretty far along. Of course, they're, we think, in much better shape now, but we don't think there's surprises in these chapters. We're hoping we can click through them. That evening, we'll be conveying the development chapter, and then folks will get to spend their time with that for about a month, and we will have a study session on January 22nd to review development, along with the agriculture chapter, because that's really a form of development as well. It's at that point that we hope to have our public works numbers all ground out. We've been working on our build-out analysis. It's been absolutely a fun time. We kind of feel like we're back in college, and we can't wait to share that as well. So anyway, we know it's been a long time coming. We're working really hard, and I'm looking forward to feedback. We know we're going to get all kinds of feedback. It's all welcome, and we're ready to just keep moving. Do note we're moving to the library. So the library was such a nice venue for that October 30th meeting. We got a lot of feedback about that. It's a little roomier than the EOC where we've been, and so we're going to try it for about 6 months and see how we do in the library. And we thank you for that room. So that's absolutely fabulous. So thank you. We will have hard copies in the library as well as we have them at City Hall. So for folks who don't want to read it online, they can come in and take a look, and we'll make copies of pages that they're interested in. So it's very available. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
Good evening, Mayor and council members and members of the public. The city held its general municipal election in consolidation with the statewide general election on November 6th. And with the all-mail ballot format that we are under now in San Mateo County, the results do take quite some time to count, as everyone has learned. So they did experience this in June, but it didn't affect us quite as much because we didn't have anything on that ballot. But they are able to receive ballots up until November 9th, and with the amount of ballots that they receive up until or prior to Election Day, by the time they're able to count everything, it does take about a week and a half. So up until today's results, we've been waiting for each release schedule. As of today, they have counted about 85% of the ballots. So we do know a lot more than we did a week ago. I will also say that for a midterm election, we have had the highest turnout numbers than we've had. Countywide, it was 73%, and in Half Moon Bay, 65%. So those are really amazing numbers for a non-presidential election. So the city had 3 council member seats up for election, and so with the top 3 vote getters, Deborah Penrose, Debbie Reddick, and Robert Brownstone will be sworn into office at our December 18th reorganization meeting, so congratulations to the 3 of you. And the city also had 5 measures on the ballot. Measure GG, which is the nursery ordinance, has passed, and Measure AA, which is our cannabis tax, has also passed. The 3 advisory measures have failed, and Matthew Chittister will come to discuss GG and AA in more detail.
Thank you, Jessica. So with Measure GG passing, as a reminder, this is an ordinance that was actually drafted and presented to the council previously, so it's fully prepared and ready for use going forward, and it will allow and regulate commercial cultivation of immature nursery starts in our existing greenhouses on our A1 agricultural sites. That law will go into effect December 28th. On December 18th, as part of the reorganization meeting, there will also be a certification of the election results, and this ordinance goes into effect 10 days later. What that means is beginning in January, our Community Development Department will begin accepting pre-applications for commercial cannabis cultivation licensing. And of course, these are discretionary permits, which means ultimately they will come to the City Council for consideration. There will be public input. And for any of the properties that are utilized for this, there will likely be some sort of land use element as well for development and reconstruction or improvements to the greenhouses. So there will be plenty of opportunity for public input for each one of the license applications. Next slide. Measure AA, again, is our tax, and this will tax any commercial cannabis activities that take place here in Half Moon Bay. We prepared it in such a way that it will allow us to take care of future changes or modifications to any of the ordinances that may take place. This takes effect on December 18th once the votes have been certified by this council. And so initially, these taxes will be collected on any retail deliveries that are coming from licensed retailers from over the hill and other parts of the Bay Area, as well as now any commercial cannabis cultivation under licensed operators under Measure GG. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those now.
Yeah, how do you determine who the retail delivery stores are?
So we'll be working with our finance department and our sales tax consultants on this. Much like other deliveries that we tax as they're received here in Half Moon Bay, we can work with consultants that have the ability to track and obtain those delivery information so that we can appropriately tax those folks. So it's something we'll be working on going forward. We want to make sure we're collecting again on the deliveries, and then of course anything that we license here in Half Moon Bay. You're welcome.
I just want to say that congratulations actually to staff, and thank you to staff. I mean, the ordinances took a lot of detail work from the city attorney's office, the deputy city manager's office, as well as consultants. And we put together, I think, a great outreach package to the public, and the ordinances over time we're probably going to have to tweak. This is uncharted territory, but we're here today because of all the hard work of staff, so thanks for that.
Thank you.
And then I just want to say, regarding the all-mail election, if we could just change the way they describe it from all-mail to all postal elections, I would like that.
We're not going backwards here, right?
Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Me too.
Makes sense, makes sense.
Thank you, Jessica.
Let's go to Jessica. I mean, the last 3 months of her life, I wouldn't say a living hell, but very, very busy, beyond the pale. So thank you, Jessica. You deserve a vacation and a nice, tall, cool
Excellent
drink.
job.
Yes. Yeah. Very hard work.
Jessica, do you know how Measure W is doing? The sales tax to implement transportation? It was very close, but do you have any insight?
I'll look it up right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll go now to public forum. We have one speaker, and that's Jules Sofer.
Jules Sofer, 536 Poplar Street in Half Moon Bay. Good evening, members of the council and city staff. I wanted to speak on Highway 92 and truck traffic on Highway 92. And the reason I'm speaking is because in the last few weeks, I've had the opportunity, if you can call it that, of going over during the commute time. And it's an abysmal commute. And it's not helped by the number of trucks that are on 92 at a time when you would think that the trucks would not be on 92 during the commute. And I don't know what the council can do because it's not a city street, but you could at least ask city staff to go on record as suggesting to the county that they take a look at some of the things that worked in the past with trucks and that are no longer being as rigorously enforced as they used to be, which would be helpful for our citizens here in Half Moon Bay. In particular, the dump used to be asked to be closed and not accept traffic during the commute time. That no longer seems to be de la guerre. And another thing that we used to do was we used to try and keep the really big, long haul, over 40 feet trucks off of 92 because there's no way that they can come up the other side over to us without crossing those yellow lines frequently. And most of the older truck drivers used to always make a big effort to pull over to the side of the road when they had those pullouts. And I've heard from friends who do this regularly that they don't bother to do that anymore, most of the newer, younger truck drivers. I think what I'm asking is for, even though there is no authority, I'm asking for some sort of a leaning on the county and trying to persuade them to make some efforts on our behalf with whatever leaning you can do. Thank you very much.
Jules. I appreciate that.
I'd like to just respond briefly if I could. So yes, about 20 years ago, I think it was, when they were renewing the permit for the quarry. The permit was up and they were discussing conditions of approval. And that's when we talked to the county about the timing of like deliveries. And I don't think we could do it at the dump at the time because their permit wasn't up. But I agree with you. We need to revisit what those conditions were. I actually don't think they're abiding by them, anymore. And I think we did do something about the number of axles, trucks with axles, the really big, huge ones. I noticed, we read about that accident on Highway 1 in Santa Cruz last week where one of those big trucks lost their brakes and rammed into like 20 cars or something like that. So I think it's worth at least taking a look at the timing of the truck traffic and see if there's any leverage there. So that's all I would say.
We do have one other person to speak on public forum, and that's Socorro Aguilar.
Good evening. My name is Socorro Aguilar. I'm a student at Half Moon Bay High School and a resident in Half Moon Bay. I am concerned about the passing of Measure GG. As it is written right now, it fails to provide information on the impacts of hiring locally on undocumented communities in Half Moon Bay. As you all know, marijuana is federally illegal, and I am concerned about the city's ability to conduct unannounced inspections that might put employees of nurseries at risk. I want to advocate for education and protection for undocumented employees at nurseries. Furthermore, as a youth, I do not believe that Measure GG was developed with young people in mind. Nursery structures do not have to be more than 1,000 feet, which is only a couple blocks away from any school, daycare center, or youth center. Research done by San Mateo County's Public Health Department shows that having local marijuana growing operations normalizes use in young people. Therefore, I urge City Council to be more mindful of our city's most vulnerable populations, young people and undocumented residents when implementing Measure GG. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakura. We're moving on to the consent calendar, and we're going to be pulling item 1G. Anything else for being pulled? Okay, can I have a motion on items 1A through?
Yes, I'll read it. I move that we adopt the consent calendar. Item 1A, waive reading of resolutions and ordinances. 1B, warrants for the month of September 2018. 1C, warrants for the month of October 2018. Item 1D, quarterly financial report for the first quarter of fiscal year 2018-2019. Item 1E, library capital donation and naming opportunity. 1F, Highway 1 South Project landscape design agreement. And just need a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Consent calendar passes. We're going to move on to item 1G. And do you want to hear the public speaker first? We have 3 speakers. The first is Ruby Salazar, followed by Daisy Sarabia.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruby Salazar, and I'm a graduate from the UCLA Immigrant Justice Fellowship. According to the Immigration Policy Institute that recently analyzed the U.S. Census Bureau data to estimate the universe of people who may experience what they call chilling effects who reside in San Mateo County, 41% of San Mateo County families with mixed status receive cash and non-cash benefits and would be directly impacted by the new proposed public charge rule. That is 46,400 immigrants and their families that would be directly impacted by the proposed public charge rule. I am here today in support of the council passing the proposed resolution in opposition of President Trump's proposed public charge rule, which would not only affect me, but my family, friends, and many community members living in Half Moon Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. Daisy Sarabia, followed by Kaylin Carrillo.
Good evening. I'm Daisy Sarabia, and I'm a student at Half Moon Bay High School. I'm also a resident in Half Moon Bay. I'm here today to support the resolution in opposition of President Trump's proposed public charge rule. One of the reasons I support the resolution is because according to the Migration Policy Institute, non-citizens in San Mateo County receive some kind of public benefits as individual or from their family. Over 60% of these are youth. Since most of these people are youth, if it's taken away from them, it will be more difficult for them and their families to be financially stable. Also, it is unfair to be asked to choose between having health care and having a pathway to legal documentation in the United States. For these two reasons, I highly encourage you to show support to our immigrant communities by passing this resolution. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daisy. Kaylin.
Good evening. My name is Kaleen Carrillo. I go to Half Moon Bay High School and I live in Half Moon Bay. I am concerned about the changes to the federal public charge rule, which is why I'm glad to hear that the Half Moon Bay City Council has created a resolution to oppose the public charge rule. As a young person in Half Moon Bay, I think it is important to support our immigrant community. By extending the definition of the public charge law, immigrant youth with disabilities will be largely affected because they rely highly on health care benefits such as Medical. For this reason, I strongly urge you all to pass this resolution. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And now, Councilmember Rybrock, would you like to say something?
This is a terrible proposed rule. It is an action where the administration thinks they can really affect our immigrant community, our undocumented residents, scare people into not taking their just benefits, try to deport people who do take their just benefits. And I really urge you in the community to oppose this rule, as well as what I believe the City Council will do shortly. Those of you who want to express a comment can go to the government website, www.regulations.gov, and you'll see it's trending as the top regulation that you can make a public comment about the unfairness and unjustness of this proposed rule. And I urge us to support our immigrant community in every way we can, and this is just one small way. So I'm definitely in favor of this resolution.
Would you like to make a motion?
I move that we approve the resolution in opposition of President Trump's proposed public charge rule.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to Ordinance Amending Half Moon Bay Municipal Code, Chapter 8.04, Animal Control, our first reading.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and honorable council members. I'm Matthew Chittister, your Deputy City Manager, and with me is Jennifer Logia. She is our intern in the City Manager's office. She is a grad student at Mills College over in Oakland in a public policy program. She's been with us for several months and worked on a lot of great projects, and we're glad to have her with us tonight to present some work she's done around the dog and animal control ordinance. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to her.
Thank you, Matthew, and good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. As Matthew mentioned, I'll be presenting an ordinance amending Half Moon Bay Municipal Code, Chapter 8.04 on animal control. This ordinance amendment is in relation to the use of dog parks in Half Moon Bay. Currently, only one dog park exists in the city, and it's located at Smith Field on Wavecrest Avenue. And since about 2001, residents and visitors have used this space as a dog park. And historically, this facility has been maintained by a nonprofit group, the Patrons of the Half Moon Bay Dog Park. They were operating under a license agreement with the city, and as of June 30th of this year, that agreement has expired, and the city has resumed full responsibility for the maintenance and management of that park. The map shown here gives you a sense of where the dog park is located. And if you've never visited the dog park, we have some pictures that show you what it looks like. The problem that we're facing is that the city's current municipal code prohibits off-leash dogs on public property. When people visit the dog park, they expect a safe space for their dogs to play freely without a leash. However, this is technically not permissible under our current municipal code. To address this issue, staff proposes an amendment to the municipal code to make an exception to this rule for designated off-leash areas in city parks. As mentioned earlier, the Half Moon Bay Dog Park at Smithfield is currently the only dog park in the city, and there are no plans to add more dog parks at this time. If the ordinance amendment is adopted, the city would implement new signs at the Half Moon Bay Dog Park designating it as an off-leash area, as well as signage that includes the updated dog park policy, which has been provided to you as attachment 2. Finally, the Parks and Recreation Commission has reviewed both the ordinance amendment and the dog park policy and recommends that the City Council approves this ordinance. Our recommendation is to conduct a public hearing and introduce on first reading an ordinance amending Half Moon Bay Municipal Code, Chapter 8.04, Animal Control. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you very
Nicely
much. That was a
done.
nice presentation. Appreciate it. Counsel, do you have any questions or comments? Okay, so
You have to open the public hearing.
we need to open the public hearing.
Hit the gavel.
Is that good enough? We have no public comment. So I'm going to now close the public hearing.
Excellent.
Thank you. That ends that, right? All right. Can I have a motion?
Go for it, Herb. You have a dog.
I move that we adopt an ordinance amending Half Moon Bay Municipal Code, Chapter 8.04, on first reading tonight.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. The second reading will come up when?
That'll be on the consent agenda for December 4th.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to Coastal Cleanup Pilot Program.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Miles Buzerghini, City Engineer, here with Jennifer, who will be doing the presentation tonight.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. I will actually be tag teaming today's presentation with Eric DeBode, the Executive Director of Abundant Grace. Okay, great. So I can see it, but you can't see it on your screens, correct? Do you have copies of the presentation in front of you? Okay, perfect. So just to provide a little bit of background on how this program came to be, In November of 2017, the City Council identified litter on the coastal trail and on the beach as a priority, and in response, staff proposed a coastal cleanup pilot program with Abundant Grace in December of 2017. In February 2018, the City Council approved a contract with Abundant Grace for just less than $60,000 to perform this pilot program through March 31st of 2019, so next March. May 11th, 2018 was our first coastal cleanup day on the coast. Quickly, just an overview of what the contract looks like currently. The scope of work that Abundant Grace does for the city is cleanups from the Seymour Ditch Trail all the way up to Kelly Avenue on both the coastal trail and also on the beach. They also do some graffiti removal, they pick up horse manure, and all of the trash, recycling, what have you, that they find on the beach and on the trail. They also recruit, transport, train, and pay all of the workers. So they really take this program and they run with it. In addition to providing the on-the-ground service, they also provide the city with monthly and quarterly reports that detail the number of days worked, the number of people that came out, the cost, and also how much garbage they've removed from the coast and from the beach. As of September, we've been invoiced for about $22,000, which is roughly 38% of the entire contract, and we've gone through 6 months of the 12 months that we allocated. So we're definitely under budget right now. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Mr. DeBode at the podium, and he's going to give you some additional details about the impacts this program has had.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council. Thank you very much for your concern about our coastal environment and also our low-income and homeless neighbors whom we employ for the Coastside Clean Team program. I'm happy to report that since May, during the course of 77 work sessions, 191 workers spent 698 hours filling 620 bags with 12,522 pounds of trash. We are very happy with that achievement because having a clean beach and a coastal trail positively impacts all the habitat and wildlife that live there and all the people who visit. Our conversations on the beach with the public have been great and have elicited enthusiastic support for the city engaging a part of our community who need employment in a creative way that also benefits the environment and the public. People think it's a wonderful partnership and a worthy program. In one of the photos that we provided, you can see a couple with families with kids who came to celebrate one of their birthdays by joining the Coastside Clean Team for the morning. The vision of Abundant Grace is to accompany people on the journey toward employment and housing, to collaborate with other agencies, to build relationship and community, to support socialization and reintegration, to provide meaningful paid work that provides a public social benefit, thereby connecting people who are often alienated back into the community, and we've seen results. 2 of our regular workers have found jobs. And last night I received a phone call around 8 p.m. from one of our workers who had literally just moved into a place. "I'm on cloud 9, Eric," he said. And he told me that he planned to be at the Coastside Clean Team on Friday morning. We have hired 28 people since May 11th, and I learned something very interesting in the course of reviewing our data for tonight's presentation. 7 people out of the 28 were very regular in showing up for work, between 17 and 33 times. One of the people who found a job came 20 times, and of the 2 top workers, the one who came 31 times found a job, and the one who came 33 times is the one who called last night to share that he has a place to call home. Yeah. That's great. Interestingly, Jennifer remembered that the 2 top workers were also the first 2 people who showed up on the very first day. So wow, this is really positive. And I'm happy to report this data to you and also to our larger community. Personally, I've been changed this year through both of our employment programs. People really want to work, and it has renewed my sense of the dignity of work and what that really means. I've seen it change people for the better. This has led my board and I to consider how we can broaden our own planning for the future year with employment programming as a priority. I want to thank the City Council for authorizing this pilot program and giving us the opportunity to provide employment and engagement to our low-income and homeless neighbors. We are committed to continuing to provide this service, and we hope that the City Council will approve an expansion of the program so we can offer even more employment opportunities for the coming year, which will hopefully result in many more success stories. Thank you very much.
Excellent work, Eric. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Jennifer. It's been a really easy partnership to go through the whole process of the contracting, and John and folks, the staff have been so supportive. I really appreciate it. Public Works staff have been great.
Thank you. We have one public comment, and we'll listen to Paulette Eisen.
Thank you. All right, so just one comment about this. I think this is great and wonderful to hear all the statistics that Eric has shared with us. But the one thing that I would really like to see, I know that when we had some of our concerts in the park at McDutra Plaza, and some of the day workers that were enjoying the concert in the park, you know, and then helping the rest of us put chairs away and tables away. And, you know, one or two of them came up to me and said, "We really need work." And I'm just hoping that Abundant Grace can focus not just on the homeless population, but also workers that are looking for work, that want to work, and you know, have a hard time, language, all kinds of things like that. But this is work that they could be doing. So I'm hoping that this population could be included in this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulette. Counsel.
I don't know whose idea it was, this pilot project. I thought it came from Jennifer initially, but it's fabulous. I've heard nothing but good things from the community. The proof is in the pudding. You know, their beaches in our parking lot are way more cleaner than they've ever been. I'm not getting complaints about it at all. So that's really amazing. And it's a testament to Eric's leadership that he could put this together and manage it and you know, bring people together to do the work. So it's really a feel-good movie of the year, if you will. You know, it's one of the great positive things I think we can put on our State of the City. The mayor can take credit for that. So thank you for that. And I saw an article in the LA Times today that the city of Los Angeles will just be beginning its own pilot project to have the homeless engaged in litter pickup and other sorts of activities in town. So they're just starting. And so Half Moon Bay's been a leader, and LA is taking our, you know, is following. So good work, everybody. I'm really pleased. Thank you.
Talk about a win-win. I think this clear that this benefits not only the people who are getting the dignity of work, but the city is benefiting. If I understand correctly, we're supposed to give direction about how we could expand the program to Kelly, Poplar, and the downtown corridor. Am I right that that's what's on the agenda?
Yes, so we would be looking specifically for one, if the council would like us to extend the program beyond the March 31st date next year, and then also if we choose to extend the program, what that scope would look like, whether it would be the same as it currently is, or if we'd like to include Poplar Street, Kelly Avenue, potentially the downtown corridor, maybe even special events. That's really open to the council's discretion, so we're really looking forward for some feedback.
Visitor their serving corridors make a lot of sense, you know, Poplar and Kelly and Main Street to start. But yeah, I mean, if there are other places that need it, let's look at a budget for it.
And I also like the idea of having shirts. I was told that there are shirts now that people in the program can wear. So I think if visitors see on Main Street that we have homeless and low-income people who are cleaning our streets with, you know, proudly serving Half Moon Bay, I think that's like a triple win. It's a win for the people doing it, it's a win for the city, and it's a win for the recognition that we're doing the right thing.
I like Robert's T-shirt that he's wearing. It says, "The future is here." So maybe the city of Half Moon Bay on the back and the future is here on the front. That would be.
I personally am in favor of expanding it as wide as we can. I definitely want to extend the contract. I would like to extend it for a full year beyond March, not just 6 months. And I'd also like to look at what we'd have to do in terms of budgeting to provide the homeless the opportunity to work on Main Street and our Poplar and Kelly streets, and special events as well.
Great, so we'll go ahead and we'll put together something and we'll bring it back as part of the mid-year budget then. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, if I may, just to provide a clarification, my reading of the staff's recommendation is to extend the contract to June 2020.
Good.
So it's an 18-month period.
Great.
The money that's available now may take us to the end of this fiscal year, so we will be coming back with the budget, and the amount that we recommend for the budget for fiscal year 18-19 will guide how we can work on expanding the program with abundant grace.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Helpful, thanks.
Okay, we move on to item 3B, options for residential tenant protection measures.
Mayor Penrose. Sorry, if I could interrupt, we do need a motion on the last item, as the staff recommendation is to extend the program and authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute an amendment to the agreement.
I have a motion.
I move staff recommendations.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Jessica.
All right. Good evening again. The item before you is really an overview of some options that you have to consider tenant protection measures. And this is kind of an ongoing conversation we've been having with regards to your council priority for affordable housing. Be going over a little bit of background to set the context, highlight a few of the options, discuss next steps, and seek your input so that we can prepare an ordinance, which is what we're hoping to do with this. So a little context. Over the past year, this has been an especially active topic coming from the council priority session in spring. We had discussions about all kinds of affordable housing options, provisions, things you wanted us to pursue, including the process streamlining work that is ongoing and work that the mayor has been putting forward. We've also had two really well-attended community conversations about housing, which were sponsored by the Home for All initiative through San Mateo County. These were big endeavors. The first one was in July, and about 90 people came. And it was at a really broad, open-ended discussion, and we came out of that with short-term, mid-term, and long-term thinking from the community that really reinforced council's previous discussion. And then in October, we just focused in on diverse housing options. About 80 folks were at that session, and we got a lot of positive feedback for that one as well. That input is actually feeding right into the local coastal program update for the development chapter. In September, at your September 4th session, we talked about a housing work plan. We brought you a series of choices to put together into what we thought would be about a 2-year work plan. And tenant protection measures was one of them that you definitely, we thought we had the feedback to go forward with. This, by the way, is one of our community conversations, but this is actually the slide from the Housing Work Plan September 4th presentation, and the items in green were ones that you gave us the feedback about preparing some more information on, or ordinances. We also, in the same category, we want to come back and work on our Affordable Housing Fund allocation process. I'll go ahead and, well, I want to acknowledge at that session in September, we didn't end up setting the housing work plan. We didn't turn the screws on real tight for that. We kind of got the sense of the top level things that you wanted us to work on and bring back to you, and agreed to keep a conversation open about affordable housing. And so I see this session tonight as part of that, and I look forward to your discussion as it's coming forward, but that was the context. So in your staff report, we have prepared an overview of the basic components that are most commonly implemented into tenant protection measures and what we're seeing around the Bay Area. Noting that some of the other cities that we took a look at are actually very new in the process as well. I understand that Redwood City just adopted theirs, and they don't come into effect until January, so we don't get to learn too much yet from how they're going to work. I'm waiting to hear a little bit from Mountain View and some other jurisdictions about them. But the basic items that we brought were minimum lease terms, which is generally a 1-year minimum lease term where a rent would be established and not changed during that period. At the end of the 1-year term, the rent can be raised, but another 1-year term would be offered, which is the kind of the typical construct, which can be very helpful. Enhanced notice provisions, these are relative to eviction when a tenancy is being proposed to be ended by the landlord, to have a longer lead time. Relocation assistance is another measure that some of these tenant protection programs include. And then tenant-landlord mediation, this is in the case of helping tenants negotiate and work with their landlord when different conditions are coming through on their leases, such as higher rent rates. So we are pretty confident that we could move forward fairly quickly with a tenant protection draft ordinance, depending on your input tonight, and would really like to have something at a public draft level for January with landlord outreach. We know we need to get some feedback from folks, and we know that you want us to do that, and we think it works really well in this room to just go ahead and get everybody to come on in here and not schedule it as a first reading. We've had some feedback from you about, boy, it's kind of nice to not have the pressure of a first reading when we just see that draft ordinance for the first time. Then we can polish it up and then probably move a little more quickly through the first and second reading to get an ordinance in place. So that's what we were hoping to do with this item. And we do note, this is kind of a bit of an ask. we don't have this expertise in-house. This is certainly not, I'm not a housing specialist. I've worked with a lot of housing people over the years, but I've always had a housing coordinator who took care of all the nitty-gritty details. We're going to need some support if we're going to put in a tenant protection measure. It needs to be managed a bit, and there's some other things that we need support with in the overall package of affordable housing. So we would like to come back with some mid-year budget or later in the year a budget adjustment to include some contract services for a housing specialist. And I'm not thinking about very many hours, and more somewhere, it would probably range quite a bit, somewhere between 10 and 40 hours a month, depending on what we're up to and kind of where we are in a cycle for monitoring and things like that. There's a few options out there. I've been talking to housing coordinators as well as the housing department for San Mateo County, which has been easy to do now because we're in such a good partnership with them through the Home for All initiative. And so they're giving us ideas on what would be kind of an appropriate scale and approach to this. But I just really wanted to bring it up now because to be able to implement this, we would want this kind of ready to go to have that kind of support. Now, also on this slide, you'll note that there's other implementation opportunities. San Mateo County, this surprised me. The Department of Housing, they themselves fund Project Sentinel, who does some of their negotiations. Their staff doesn't do that work. They get that expertise from that group. They also contribute to legal aid for cases where it gets a little more extreme in a conflict with landlords and tenants. So it's there's a lot of layers of complexity to it. You'll note that this ordinance would be quite heavily needing the attention of our city attorney, and this is pretty technical stuff and what you can and can't do with it. Now, I do want to just have a note about rent stabilization because the topic has come up from time to time. It was discussed at your retreat in the spring. A few folks have mentioned it in our community conversations. And we did write about it a bit in your September 4th staff report for the housing work plan. My recollection of our discussion that night was that it was going to be helpful to wait until the election because Proposition 10 was on the ballot, which could have repealed the Costa-Hawkins Act, but it did not. So now we know what the scope of allowed rent stabilization measures could be, and at that point in time, we just really weren't sure where it was going. We did not come prepared to proceed with rent stabilization at this point. We were prepared to move forward quickly with tenant protections, but we don't know where Council's mind is on this. So we wanted to remember that we've been talking about it, and we also note that we see it as a separate project. It would be a separate ordinance if that was something you wanted to work on. And so that's just a flyover of where we're going, and I can't go deep on this. We can go a lot deeper in January when we would like to come back with some draft materials. And so we're just looking for your community's comments and your direction.
Okay, I have a comment. I wrote a little something up knowing we'd be discussing this tonight, and I'm just going to read from my notes. We are taking care to assure that our dogs are allowed the freedom to run in safe, protected environment. It is unconscionable that we are not protecting our citizens in the same way. I personally want minimum lease terms of at least 1 year with renewal on an annual basis if requested by a tenant. I want just cause eviction ordinance, rental relocation assistance for tenants below the median income. I want enhanced notice provisions of 90 days if a tenant has lived there for 1 year and 60 days if less than that. I also want to see an ordinance covering proper upkeep by landlords of all rental units. Plumbing should work, electricity should work, and tenants should be free from pollution by pests, etc. I also want to consider a 3% cap on rent increases for a minimal 3-year period, during which time we work to build workforce affordable housing. So I'm asking for rent stabilization for a 3-year period only. And I'll allow the rest of council to mention what they think.
So I'm not prepared to make a decision on rent stabilization. I think that's a serious issue that requires a community conversation and probably a ballot. At the very least, it requires a lot of significant outreach to stakeholders. And I think we should have a sitting 5-member council who has that conversation and makes that decision, as opposed to the 3 of us. So I'm not prepared to go there tonight. Or on just cause eviction, another sort of complex issue that I think deserves attention. And I want to make sure that we're not pursuing that to the detriment of completing our local coastal program, because for me, that's a priority. So we have to be very careful about the trade-offs we make on staff time and budgeting for those purposes. So I voted for Prop 10. It didn't pass, but I have told folks during my campaign that I take the issue of a market intervention like that very seriously, that it deserves broad public outreach, much as we did with the cannabis issue. In the meantime, I'm very happy to go along with a tenant protection ordinance. And that would, I'm guessing you're talking about including minimum lease terms, enhanced notice provisions, relocation assistance, and the mediation all in one ordinance. I wasn't sure sort of what package of elements you were talking about for this, but.
I think that's how we can structure it. We'll learn more as we dig in a little bit deeper, but yeah, that was the intent.
Yeah. And again, I think we need a sitting 5-member council to get more educated on the issues and have a conversation with duly elected team. So that's where I am. Move forward on tenant protections and postpone into the future a discussion on these bigger, more complicated issues, which I understand the need. I'm not fighting the need, but I need to base my decision on as much information as possible and public input.
Again, Jules Sofer, 536 Poplar Street in Half Moon Bay. I would just like to have some clarification. Are we talking about, like most cities, 4 units and more? Or are we talking about 1 unit? Because if we're talking about someone who owns 1 rental unit, it makes a big difference in what you're discussing. I'd like to know where we're going with this. Thank you.
I think that's a good question. And are you talking about both the tenant protections and rent stabilization? Yeah. So tenant protections currently deal with multifamily dwellings, I believe. That's the standard. So not homes, not condos, but more than, I don't know how many units, 4?
It can include condos. It just does not include single-family residence. Isn't that correct?
My understanding is that tenant protections can be more broadly applied than rent stabilization. Rent stabilization does not apply to single-family homes or condos, and it's debatable about whether or not it can be applied to mobile homes. Some cities put as the speaker noted, you can set whether it be above a certain number of units in a particular development. Tenant protections, I think you have more flexibility. So your thoughts on that are really important to us in terms of drafting an ordinance. And then remember, with a really draft ordinance, we can keep options inside draft language to specifically encourage community input in your discussion. So this seems like one of those discussion areas.
So we have many instances of single-family homes being rented out to multiple families. So I would think in that situation that some tenant protections are in order. Now, Jules, you might want to come up and talk about, are you just talking about you renting out a room to one person, or what is your concern? I know that you have a rental unit or...
No, I was just wanting to get a little bit of philosophical thinking in what was coming down the pike. I have nothing in the fire on this one. I'm just wondering what you're talking about. Thank you.
Talking about giving some relief to our rental community. As Jill mentioned, we've had lots of input over multiple meetings that people are being, priced out, having to move, having to commute back for service level jobs. We have multiple families living in homes where, they're being gouged or they're on month-to-month rents. And some of these people work in the school district, some of them work in our hotels, but it's clearly, a problem. So one way to address the injustices is to provide some protections, longer terms, longer noticing, some relocation. If you're just kicking people out so you can jack up the rent $500 a month, that's clearly an unjust situation. So many cities in California have introduced tenant protection measures, separate from any sort of rent stabilization programs, but just to make the system more fair. And protect your local labor force. Harvey.
Thank you. I want to agree with both of my fellow council members. I definitely support the tenant protections, the draft measure that apparently is going to come back to us. I think all of those items, the minimum lease, enhanced notice, relocation assistance, I'm not so sure about tenant-landlord mediation, but probably that's a good idea. And I think we're all in agreement that that should be done soon. And that doesn't require an enormous amount of staff time. I think there's already work on that. I'd also like to support the mayor's idea that rent stabilization is something that we really, really need to consider. Now, I understand it's contentious. I understand that there are lots of arguments against, but where I'm coming from is I think it is time that we actually do implement rent stabilization, but I would like to see it done in a conscious way where the community does get a chance to weigh in. And if we have to hire somebody to take care of writing the ordinance and dealing with the public input, that's fine with me. But I really think our time has come. We keep talking about it. We keep saying what the housing crisis is so awful. This is a chance we can have to actually make a significant difference. And if we want to have, say, a 3-year moratorium on not having more than a 3% rent increase or something like that, it's fine with me. But I think we need to have the community weigh in on this and talk about it. If it's necessary to be a ballot measure in June, then so be it. But it's time to stop talking and start acting to help our tenants.
Thank you, Harvey. That's exactly my point. My point is that we have heard from the community that they want rent stabilization. Now, that doesn't mean we've heard from the opponents to rent stabilization, and I certainly feel that it should be open for community discussion. But there is no reason to be putting it off any longer. It is important to me that we do this, that we help our neighbors out. We've been talking about it for 4 years now in this council. We've been involved with it actively for 2 years in this council, and so far we've done nothing to move us in the direction of doing anything to stabilize rents here. It's not happening. And yes, I think it's important that the staff take care of business. They have a lot on their plate. I understand that. But this is a priority for me. This is a big priority for me. It's number one.
Well, you see, I don't know what the scope of the problem is. We don't know what the scope of the rent issues are, and we don't know whether rent stabilization here will make a difference. We don't know how many units it would apply to. You know, the rents are already really high. You're not going to roll back rents, right? So I need to understand in detail the scope of the problem and how much of a difference it would make, if it would make any difference. So I'm not going to make any decision about it until we do our homework. And I want all 5 council members up here, you know, weighing the information and then, you know, making a decision, rather than, you know, 2 of us right now trying to drive the agenda. So I think we need to be, you know, careful here. We can, we don't have to wait on getting some housing built. I think we should be, if anything, we should be looking at building housing and see if we can make that South Main Street project happen, what have you. But I'm not going to put my rubber stamp on such an important policy decision without looking at all the data and hearing from all the stakeholders.
I would absolutely agree. We need all of the data, and that's the job that I'm asking staff to do, to gather that data for us. And one of the things that Jill brought up was that she is going to need some help with a housing program director, part-time, and I am in favor of doing that, and that may be one thing that will help us get a little further on this thing. I don't think we build affordable housing and do that and not do this. I think you do both things in parallel.
I'm not going to budget a staffer to just work on housing issues because we're a small town. And if you look at all those communities that are in the spreadsheet who are doing like rent stabilization, they're all the major cities in California. There's no small towns here. Small towns typically do not have, you know, housing staff. So I want us to look very carefully at any scope of work and budget for any of these activities, and I want to understand the trade-offs on existing staff time. I'm not making a decision or recommendation tonight to hire housing consultants. I'm not making any decision in that direction until I see a draft scope of work and I understand how it fits in with all the pieces of the work that we're doing. I'm sorry, I'm not going there tonight. I'm not going to give direction to hire a housing consultant tonight.
This is complicated, no question. I told you where I'm coming from on a philosophical basis. If you want to talk about towns that have rent stabilization that works, East Palo Alto is a good example, so it can be done. If we wait until January to begin to have the 5-member council weigh in on where we want to go, that's okay with me. All I'm saying is let's not just keep talking about it. I think we need to go in the direction of rent stabilization, but we also need to have community input. And, you know, talk is cheap, but it's important that we move forward. So I'm not necessarily saying that we have to hire somebody this year, but we should definitely go in the direction of helping our tenants in any way we can. The tenant protection ordinance, I think, is a good start, but I believe we should go beyond that and do what's right for our tenants in stabilizing these crazy rents. So I agree we shouldn't, we should know what we're talking about, we should have data, but we should not use that as an excuse for not moving forward. And I think this is a really important measure. And I understand that the local coastal land use plan is also really important, and I understand that takes a lot of staff time. But I think we could walk and chew gum at the same time. So I think these are both really important for our community, and we should work to move forward on both the LCP update and the direction for tenant protection, and ultimately, in my opinion, rent stabilization.
Jill, can you explain a little bit about what the housing person that you're talking about might be doing?
Sure. So initially, I would hope this person could help us do some of this research that you're talking about. I don't think we need that for the tenant protection measures, but definitely it would be helpful if you want to pursue rent stabilization. The person could also do our monitoring. We're needing to monitor the status of deed-restricted affordable housing units that you already have in town. There's about 300 of them, and we need to be paying attention to that. They could also work with us on promotions and other kinds of things that you might see over time. But again, I would really see it as kind of a bursty amount of work. I was really hoping to get somebody from San Mateo County Department of Housing who's already employed full-time there, because maybe there'd be a month where we have a lot of work, and then our steady state would probably be pretty minimal. We do not need a full-time housing person. I've worked in the city of Redwood City for 13 years. They have 2 people there. They have a ton of housing going on, and it's a huge program. We're not in. We just can't do that, and and that's okay. It helps me see the scaling from what they're doing to what we might need.
I want priority number 1 to get housing built. That's where we need to be devoting our energy, and whatever limited financial resources we can apply to it.
So I forgot to mention something else. With regards to the Affordable Housing Fund, we would like to work with you, and it would be nice if we had support from a housing specialist to set up some options for how you might allocate funds. It's really important to have that process set up so that you're nimble and ready to bridge the gap for somebody who could come in and do an affordable housing project. And we're not ready to do that. So that's another piece of what we could do. And the last thing I forgot to tell you about is that your ADU ordinance is being taken up by the Coastal Commission on December 12th in Newport Beach, and the staff is recommending approval as it was drafted as a minor amendment, and we're absolutely thrilled about that. So we'll keep you posted on that, but that's another thing where we're seeing quite a bit of activity. Now that is more land use side, and the staff you have, we're handling that just fine. We're absolutely great.
That's really good news, Jill. Thank you.
So if I may, I may have a suggestion based on what I'm hearing. So I do hear common ground on the tenant protection ordinance, and I believe I heard Jill say that we could have something back in January on that. I do also agree with Jill that I think it's important why we can chew gum and walk at the same time, that the two are probably maybe proceed in tandem to some degree, but they are kept separate. There will be public comment on the ordinance for the tenant protection if we proceed with the 3 or 4 of the bullet points that are summarized here, and we don't want that public hearing to be about rent stabilization. So I do believe bringing them forward as a package would confuse the issue. We want to make it clear that these steps can be done, and as Jill said, they are more flexible and apply to a greater housing stock than how we can apply rent stabilization. So that can move forward, and I heard common ground on taking the steps to do that, and I also heard Jill say that we can probably do that without the specialist. On the rent stabilization, I agree with Jill completely. We're looking at a very limited scope of work initially, and if she can get someone who works for the county or a minimal scope of work that helps us do the research on what is a really complicated issue, on what other cities have done and how rent stabilization works, then we could bring all that information forward for that public discussion. That could be in January, but again, we want to be careful that, do we have 2 hearings back to back? How do we keep them separate? Maybe it takes us a little more time to do that research, so that comes a little bit later. But that's a discussion where you would have a full public comment period, people could comment on the pros and cons, and we would have full research done with options that are available, what other cities have done, and then what goes into it once you have one. So I think that step's also critical from this housing specialist to tell us what the needs would be beyond. Comments were made about what if we would need a housing person, and that would be really important for us to know once you have an ordinance in place, what does it take to manage that ordinance? Do we need a rent stabilization committee to work out differences? There's care and feeding that goes into it, and so that information I think would also be very valuable when we come back for that first session. So I think the concern about hiring the consultant, I think we can handle that. We'll look for a way and make that affordable, and then work to keep the 2 moving, but bring back what I heard there was agreement on in January if we can.
I'm fine with that. I have no need to see them done in tandem. In fact, I agree. It would be very confusing for the public. Certainly confusing for the public, certainly confusing for everybody involved if we tried to do the 2 at the same time. And trying to do 2 at the same time might end up hurting both. So I think going with the tenant protection measures first, dealing with that, but keeping in mind the housing specialists to do the preliminary work and research on rent stabilization, I think is something we could be doing without having involved public comment at this stage.
Did we give you sufficient direction, Jill?
Okay, I think that ends everything that's written on the agenda, but now we have items for future agenda.
I would like to have a staff input on a resolution to support single-payer health care for California. It doesn't have to be a very complicated resolution. It can be straightforward, shouldn't take much staff time, but I think it's important, and I'd like to put it on a future agenda.
Do we have any city council reports?
I went to the Midcoast Community Council meeting with our new city manager, so I'm told I'm supposed to say where I've gone. I've gone to that.
This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yes, thank you.